I'm Ulrike Eder. I'm Chief Marketing Officer here at eSynergy, and thanks for coming and welcome to our quarterly flagship event, the Tech Series. I'm just going to give you a quick rundown of what's happening tonight. We'll have the lovely Simon do a little bit of an intro, 5 to 10 minutes into engineering resilience, before my colleague Paul will introduce our panel for tonight, which will run for 45 minutes or so. We'll then go into Q&A, so please keep your questions ready. We have refreshments after the event, so please stay and network, and if we run out of time for questions, we'll make sure our panelists are around to take them afterwards. Emergency exits, I think it's probably the fastest, but otherwise I'm sure there's some that way. And yeah, I think that's it. One quick thing for me, takes a lot, it doesn't look like it, but it takes a lot to get these events together and people here. So thanks a lot to Nicole and Adele, wherever they are, from the marketing team, and good job. All right, let's get into it. Oh, sorry, I almost forgot the most important thing. This event is live streamed. If you would like to not be live streamed, it's probably too late. But yeah, just to be aware, we are live streaming this. Thank you. Simon.
Thanks, Ulrike. This is quick. So, I'm Simon Rohrer. I'm head of enterprise architecture and technology. Head of enterprise technology architecture and ways of working at Saxo Bank in Denmark. I've been there for 6 years now. This is our canteen with Rexy in the middle, who reminds us to stay ahead of the competition if we don't want to be eaten. So I also was really honoured to contribute to John Smart's book, Sooner, Safer, Happier. About 4 years ago now this came out. And what this talks about in both ways of working, but also in sort of building digital systems, is to focus on outcomes. Not a single one. Don't do an agile transformation, don't do a DevOps transformation. Don't do a cloud transformation, but focus on balanced outcomes, a balanced scorecard of better, value, sooner, safer, happier. Value is what makes you you. It's special. We can't tell you what value is. Better is about quality, about continuously focusing on quality. Sooner is about focusing on flow, time to learning, time to value. Safer is about security, privacy, and minimum viable compliance, especially if you're in places like financial services, like I am. And happier is about happier customer, colleagues, citizens, and climate. And for me, I think resilience actually hits all of these. Again, ways of working is one of my big focuses, and I think this hits how we build resilient systems as well. We used to spend months planning what we were going to do, and then another few months developing, designing, a few months testing, and then throw it over the wall to another team building something to release, and then some poor team would get to operate it forever. And a lot of things happened to change that over the last 20, 25 years. And now at least the elite teams are doing this through an infinite loop, and we can go from delivering value in months or years to days or maybe even hours, and we deliver new changes pretty quickly, and we can deliver new infrastructure pretty quickly. And I think this changes pretty radically how we need to design and operate and continuously focus on resilience. So that was how sort of ways of working have changed. But I think for those of us who are in enterprises that have any kind of legacy. We were talking just before about how I'm quite lucky, we're quite lucky in Saxo Bank that we don't have mainframes, but we've still got a spider's web of 30 years worth of technology legacy to deal with. And that complexity in that landscape, that for me is sort of the opposite of building resilience, because the more complexity is, the harder it is for you to have sort of resilience and low blast radius. Roger Sessions, who is my favorite writer on enterprise architecture, and a lesson to learn for all of us, he's no longer an enterprise architect, he's now retired and runs a meditation retreat in Mexico. It's possibly a little less stressful. But he says an organization that lacks a viable program in enterprise architecture will pay the cost in IT complexity. Complexity is the enemy, and enterprise architecture is the only solution to that. And Roger Sessions wrote an awesome book, and I won't drain this slide on going through all of it, but it's effectively microservices before microservices, about partitioning your capabilities and designing those for resilience and for teams to develop. Bunch of nice patterns, and that leads me into, I guess, my 4 very brief slides on what I've learned over implementing what I hope is a pretty resilient system and organization over the last few years, which is that patterns are more important than technologies. This isn't about picking individual sort of technologies, and much as I love something like Kafka, Confluent Kafka, it's awesome. It's not the important thing to pick. The patterns that you implement are so much more important. Over and above that, and the session is a lot about cloud, but a lot of us, certainly in the financial services industries, the surveys are saying are repatriating some of our workloads because of cost, because the benefits of cloud itself, public cloud, are not necessarily coming through. But that doesn't mean we should shy away from cloud class technologies. The cloud class technologies are ones which really, really can radically improve our resilience. Secondly, this is something that is an attitude that I think should be promoted through architecture. There's an architecture writer called Barry O'Reilly who has done an awesome, effectively reinvention of architecture with this theory of residuality. Also people like Michael Bolton and James Bark on testing. But when you design a system, when you test a system, you shouldn't be looking just to meet requirements. You should be continually asking, what could go wrong here? Again, through architecture, through design, through build, through testing. And finally, and I think we'll get to this on the panel a bit later, this isn't just about building resilient technology, it's about looking at your organization, looking at the culture of the organization, looking at building teams rather than relying on individuals, and just building your organization so it itself is a resilient organization, and it has the culture to be able to sustain your resilient technology. And finally, you're not going to do this quickly. So slowly, we at Saxo Bank have been moving from a spider's web of complex technology that itself inherently lacks resilience to where we focused on some of our most important services and started to slowly refactor the teams and the technology to be more resilient. And this is something that's going to take, it's going to take a long time, but it's evolutionary and it takes time. Thanks, that's me. Over to Paul, who's going to introduce the rest of the panel.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Simon. Welcome, everyone. So eSynergy, we are very happy and delighted to welcome you tonight and hosting this event. I'm Paul Hsu. I'm one of the delivery directors at eSynergy. When you talk about scalability, for me, it's about uptime and scalability. True story here. So if you imagine year 2000, fresh out of uni, in a startup in a basement in Victoria, uptime was about the cleaner not turning off the machine when we went home. True story. And scalability was James, who was my partner in crime in reporting team, copying over on several floppy disks at the time, because not even CD existed, an access database so that we could provide reporting to the business. That startup turned out to be lastminute.com, so they did all right in the end. But yeah, anyway. But yeah, without further ado, I would like to welcome our panelists. So maybe if you come up and then we can do quick intros. Yeah. Don't be shy. So, right. Okay. So maybe if we just do a quick one-liner intro. Start with you, Graham, if that's all right.
Hi, so I'm Graham Howard. I'm the Group CIO for Benefact. We are a financial services company doing insurance, asset management, broking. We're a bit unusual because we're for profit for good. So a very commercial company, but we give all our profits back to charity, which makes it really weird for a financial services company, but a nice place to be.
Hello everyone, I'm Ravneet, CTO at Alika Bank. So we, at Alika Bank, we are on the mission to be the most recommended business bank in UK, and we've been recognized as the fastest growing technology company or a bank, or whatever you can say, in Europe as well as UK. So yeah, good to be here.
Hi everyone, I'm Corinne Richardson. I'm the head of data engineering for Department for Education. So we do education for English schools, apart from obviously private sector schools. We also do children's social care and early years provision, so nurseries, etc. So, and I look after all of the data and all the good stuff around about your kids, if you've got kids in schools.
Cool. And you've met me. Hi.
Right. Okay. All right. We'll dive straight in. So, what does good look like for a resilient and scalable infrastructure? What are the key things that you feel are important to achieve this?
So I think from the resiliency of the infrastructure, I think, as you said previously, the uptime, so that is important. So I think it's the performance, as in like probably what is your customer experience in terms of the resiliency of the infrastructure. And obviously, how your infrastructure or applications are behaving when they're in production. So there are multiple aspects to it for me.
And sometimes resilience isn't necessarily a 24/7 always-on service, because that's not necessarily the need. So it's about what's fit for purpose for what you're actually delivering. So sometimes actually a fairly scaled back cheap thing can be fine. And you don't need to go for the Rolls-Royce version of everything, because that's obviously really high cost. So it's around understanding what the use case is, what people are doing with that service, what their user needs are, and what's good enough, basically, because over-engineering stuff is as bad as under-engineering it, I think.
Okay, yeah, we'll move on. So resilience requires costs and often competes with other work. So how do you balance the cost of resilience with the cost of failure?
I think it's a perspective. So I personally believe, like, if you have a good engineering team, so resiliency is automatically they would think about it. So it's not like an after requirement. So obviously we talk about the functional requirements and non-functional requirements, but if it is like well-informed team, a cross-functional team working on a problem, they would understand what their problem is and try to fix it. So I think it's just not about the cost, it's about like balancing, and it's the overall experience. Are we talking about just delivering the functionality and putting it in hands of the customer? Then we'll think about a different perspective. But if you're thinking about the customer experience, then resiliency is part of it. So any business, any product owner, or any organization should be fully vested as in like what kind of experience and a customer would have by using the technology or the products or software applications they are using. I think it's not a question of cost, it's, I guess, how you perceive that requirement.
I think it's definitely about how you're going to perceive that service and how important that service is. I mean, we all work in regulated industry, so we need to work at a certain level anyway. But there's always that discussion, isn't it? It's always cost versus quality, and resilience and uptime, and they're all individual elements. But if your customer base can't access your services, it doesn't matter if it's cost £1 million or more. But if they can access it and you can do business, it's a really fine blend, I think. And it's, as you say, it's not having everything at the same level. It's ensuring that you understand what's going to make the biggest impact, what you can afford to lose and what you can't afford to lose, and making sure it's well designed within your structure and team.
There's a bit, sorry, on like a risk-based piece as well. So sometimes the risk of putting a lot of money into a service is what you need to do, from a reputational perspective or anything like that. So you might be bound to do that because that's a service that you've got a lot of users, or there's like a key dependency for something very big. So like, from a Department of Education perspective, some key stuff around funding for schools. So they're services that we have to make robust because the school funding happens from them, and it's like to the penny. So that's kind of the service that you offer. But there's other things that are less important. So your resilience piece and your sort of cost could be lower. So it's about that risk and reward piece, I think, and reputation, I think, as well.
So I couldn't agree more. I think I've learned an awful lot over the last year implementing the Digital Operational Resilience Act, being a EU regulated entity, and I think it's got to be risk and reward based. Ultimately, the engineering cost of resilience for the various scenarios that you're engineering to be resilient against is an insurance cost that you're paying. You know, you pay different types of insurance, and ultimately resilience cost is yet another insurance cost, and it's managed against risk exactly that way.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Simon. Okay, you'll love this one. Show of hands from our panelists. Do you agree with this statement? So, AI does have a role to play in resilient engineering.
I think it depends upon like how you define AI.
Okay. Yeah. So Simon, you seemed unsure.
Yeah, no, exactly this, and I know we've had this discussion before. I think I'm not certain that LLMs have a particular role to play, but I think there are other types of AI, in particular machine learning. Things in the AI ops space. There's one particular example on the machine learning side that we found particularly good for not necessarily the sort of resilient side of what we're talking about, but more the scaling side. So there's a couple of contenders in the Kubernetes space called ScaleOps and Perfect Scale, which can use machine learning to work out how much resource you've been using and how that compares to the resource you've been requesting, and then right-sizing your resources to cost optimize. And this stuff it's super efficient, actually mind-blowing in how efficient it is. So we found really good use of that. Some of the AI ops space as well.
I think it's really important to think about, when you think of AI, and it's obviously overhyped and everyone's talking about it and not about Gen AI, but if you think about all the data that a company has residing within it, and you think about the importance of scalability, it's a decision-based matrix, isn't it? If I've got more customers on my website, I need to scale and get more capacity. If I've got more flow, all that data is available, and I don't think it's AI necessarily. It could be machine learning, it could be even just data analytics that are automated. I think there's a huge part to play. It's a decision-based matrix of information. That, to me, is perfect use case. That's what I believe anyone who's making any money out of Gen AI isn't really doing that. They're doing it on data decision-made places. So I feel it's a really interesting area, but I wouldn't call it AI. I'd just call it hardcore analytics, maybe. But
And with observability across, I guess, the built-in that comes within the modern tools that we use in, obviously, to help support the resiliency of our infrastructure, a lot of anomaly detection there. I think that definitely plays a big role, but I don't think like today, it's not LLM, it's more like machine learning, statistics, basically, that actually contribute to it.
Even down to proactive monitoring and stuff, isn't it? If you know what's going on, you can switch it and it can add decisions and matrices. It gets back to simplistic decisions, isn't it? If you can do that without having to think about it and have it automatically happening, I just think you can be much more nimble, you can save cost, there's a load of advantages.
Yeah. So Simon, in your opening talk, you talked about the importance of going beyond technology for resilience. So what are the types of things? So, things in my mind are, does the culture matter? Is it just about the architecture? Is it about tech skill? What would you say are the important things when you talk about going beyond technology?
Honestly, number one for me is finding people and incentivizing people to care. Honestly, you get people to care about more than just delivering the next feature off their backlog, that they actually care about the system. When I talked about that sort of shift from project mode and silos to genuine, you build it, you run it, DevOps, getting teams to, the first thing they do in the morning is to look at the dashboard. How's your system performing? Are there any weird glitches? Does this graph look normal, or is there something out of the way on it? That is as important, if not more important, than pick the next user story off Jira, honestly.
So I think there's a sort of a bigger piece in terms of, understanding what's the outcomes you're trying to achieve rather than delivering widgets, like a thing that somebody said they wanted 5 years ago, and it's like, you're doing that. But it's like, what's that sort of holistic outcome you're after? But also all of those things you listed for me, architecture is massively important, the skills of your people are massively important, and the culture and ways of working of the teams are hugely important. And if you don't get all of those right, if you tick one of those boxes, you still probably aren't heading in the right direction. Something's broken. So I think it's like all of those things plus probably a load of others. So it's kind of that they're really important.
I think culture is very, very important here because the first thing is like, even as an engineer, I think you learn best when you're actually looking into the production, how your applications are behaving, what are they doing, what are the problems that customers are facing. If you have that kind of observability in place, the next thing is like, do you have a team that really cares? Do they look into it? You can have the nicest tools in your production that tells about your production workloads, but if your team is not looking into it, then it's of no use. And that needs a cultural shift. I guess probably we've gone through a cycle where we had very few people looking into it, and now people actually looking and learning and adopting them into their day-to-day practices, into their development practices. And I think that forms quite a significant part of resiliency. When we are building APIs or when we are building the workloads, are we thinking about the performance of them? What are the risks that we can have? What are the trade-offs that we are making? Which is kind of an architectural decisions as well. But if they are actually learning, upskilling, taking advantage of those observability tools, I think it just helps the engineers to take informed decisions.
Say that for me, we're in a lucky position of having some 44, 45-year-old mainframes and some very old technology, which is great because our cloud platform that we've been building for the last 18 months is fantastic because it hasn't got anything on it. So we've spent a lot of time on architecting it, making sure we're doing it right, making sure our processes are right, making sure our resilient setup is in the right way. Have we got the burst capacity? Are we auto-scaling? Are we doing all those things with minimal workloads? And I've employed the right people. So I've got some highly skilled engineers now that are coming in and they're doing a huge amount of additional workload and setting us up for success. But if I don't get the culture bit right and match that with my old systems, which work really well, I mean, to be really honest, they work really well, just that they're quite hard to look after. So it's blending all that together. And I think, as you were saying, it's when you start to use it, when we put a workload on there, we're like, okay, that was the best plan in the world. It didn't actually work out quite like we hoped. Because when we've got the data coming through, we made a mistake there. Hands up, sorry, my bad. But you're moving through it. So it is that kind of flex of the culture, of the adaptability. And we're building adaptable systems, we need to be adaptable as well. And I think it's that holy trinity, isn't it? That whole lexicon.
Okay. So we'll move on to, just conscious of time as well, but what's the biggest challenge you've encountered when optimizing for scalability with cloud? And how have you kind of overcome those?
So I think for me, so in terms of getting the best out of cloud, if you've got legacy stuff, so in the department, we've lifted and shifted from on-prem to cloud. So it's like people think it's cloud, but it's not really. So it's kind of that stuff. It's trying to shift your legacy stuff into the proper cloud where you can scale stuff, you can use the power of the compute better, the storage and all of that stuff is separated out. So that's the challenge. So it's like people think you're on cloud, but it's a pretend type of world. So we've got a new world piece here. You've got the legacy stuff, which is kind of hidden in the bubble of cloud, but it's kind of how do you morph that into the same thing? And because you then need to put cost into moving things out of what their existing sort of wrapper is, that's sunk cost really, because from a user perspective, they might not see much difference, but it's from that sort of keeping the lights on, being able to keep it resilient, but also accelerate where you need to do more things on that platform. You have to sort of bite the bullet and do it at some point. So I think that's the challenge for me. It's about how do you level up and make it all cloud proper.
Yeah, it's really good. Thanks, Corinne. All right, we'll before we move to questions from the audience, closing question then. So looking ahead, if you were to leave us with your top tip on resilient scalability based on your experience, what would you recommend to the audience here today?
Not controversial.
Easy one.
I think a bit of AI is the future state of where we're going. I think advanced cybersecurity is probably one that keeps me awake quite a lot. I think there's a lot going on. Threat attacks, threat vectors are going up. We're making really complex platforms that are more automated or more scalable. If someone attacks, we are in a massive world of pain, particularly for a financial services company. So trying to stay ahead of the game within that and implementing more technology and more frameworks and more, I guess, more observability as to what's going on. I think that's probably a real key.
I think if I think of like probably what is more important if you want to build the resiliency, I guess it's the culture and obviously observability, because that gives you a good understanding about your infrastructure and actually helps to build the culture as well. So having the right people on the right problem, I think that definitely makes a difference.
So to give it a slightly different flavour, but I agree with both of those. So around, so the sort of the skills of the people, but the mindset as well. So I think sometimes you can get people with the right skills, but if you haven't got the right mindset to sort of challenge stuff, but also, you know, you've got these fancy tools and you probably use a proportion of what they can do, but the mindset of exploring and sort of doing tech spikes and making sure that you're getting the best out of what you're paying for, I think is for me, I think.
Agree with all of these. This is the worst thing about coming last in these things. But the one thing I would add is invest in platform engineering and push as much of the resilience down into the platform as opposed to leaving it up to the individual applications that you are building. My last top tip. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I've been told we've got more time. So, okay, more questions for panelists. All right. Okay, let's go for... Okay, what strategies have you found effective in keeping data systems scalable and resilient during high demand periods?
So this one gets quite geeky, and I do go back to I said don't use technology. So I won't, no, we use Confluent Kafka, but we effectively using sort of messaging and eventual consistency, especially for your master data, and pushing things into effectively sort of in-memory data stores like Redis or Memcached, is an incredibly good pattern for effectively giving individual services their own copies of the data, so they're not dependent on upstream databases, and limiting the blast radius of sort of upstream downtime. It's a brilliant pattern. It's worked so well for us.
Yep. Okay. So one of the things we do at eSynergy is we help clients around resilience and scalability. One of our clients, dunnhumby, we've helped them build reporting, centralized monitoring, automating diagnosis and enabling real-time analysis. So I think you mentioned this, Ravneet, around observability. When we say observability, what do we mean by observability, and what are the types of tools that you use?
I think in terms of tooling, there is a kind of broad range of tools that is already available in the market. It's just like probably to see and identify what complements the infrastructure or the cloud services that you're using. And for me, like observability is like, okay, if your applications are deployed in production, do you know how they're performing? What's the performance like? What's the experience that your customers are having? And obviously that relates to the product experience metrics, insights from that. Do you know what kind of failures you are having? Can you go and have a look? I mean, look 10 years or 15 years ago, 10 years ago. So we used to build these metrics in the code, but now you have a lot of tools that you just need to deploy and you can have that. So I think that's it. And from my experience, I guess we used a wide range of tooling. I mean, in Alica, we are Azure shop basically, but in my previous career, I've used tools like Dynatrace and all those good tools as well. And it's just like they should do the job. I think that's how we use it.
Yeah, just to add on to that as well. So we've got like an AI-enabled platform. So we're sort of literally playing with the idea of how can that AI-enabled bit help us with the observability. So, you know, we've got your normal sort of like dashboarding and understanding, you know, downtime, uptime, all of that sort of metrics. But is there something within that AI sort of large language model bit that can actually do that better for us? So it's proof of concept, having a look at it. So it's like that bit feels like there could be something better that could happen in that space. So looking at your error logs or anything like that, picking out the stuff quicker rather than somebody having to trawl through. Obviously, you can pick out bits by using different tools, but you tend to get like, it's somewhere in here, don't you? Like, have a look, play your way through it. So it's kind of trying to pick out where your problems might be and giving you potential solutions up front.
I think we could spend the rest of the evening talking about observability. I went to a great conference last year on it. But I think some of the sort of cutting edge in the space, like OpenTelemetry, like some of the writing on observability 2.0 that Charity Majors has done, this stuff is awesome, but ultimately observability needs to answer the questions you need to know about what's going on in your system. That's the important thing. Can I answer them about what happened, and ideally can I answer the questions about what's about to happen, and can I predict stuff before it happens? That's the sort of ultimate goal.
Okay, and without going into too much detail, what are the types of metrics that you would use to measure that?
Sort of SRE golden signals around error rate, traffic, saturation, latency are the key ones, but then, you can, depending on what you're doing, you can go much, much, much further.
Right, does anyone have any questions? I've got a hand up over here. Yeah.
Hi. It would be fantastic to, from Simon's bit at the start with talking about the organisational resilience. We spent a lot of time kind of we're going through some of the engineering, some architectural patterns, and some memcaches and Redis, and lovely. It'd be really interesting to hear maybe more what patterns and what investments are you making in like the really boring, unsexy business continuity planning type scenarios, where all the best laid plans in the tech have failed. You've now got to deploy some human beings out to deal with your customers. What do you do with a chunky credit card machine and all the other problems of how you deal with that in the field? Where are you making those kind of hedged bets in your current things? And also war stories are all good in any of where things have gone wrong in the tech, and you've needed to use those too.
Glad I'm not answering that one.
I guess we're all regulated as well, aren't we? So we're at the moment going through, DORA and Ops Res. So that's probably the least sexy part of that. Again, be careful what I say. We've got lots of legacy systems which are really are clunky. But it's about how you sort of blend that data, and how I'm pushing a lot on having the data available. So even if it's in an older platform and it's going to fail, if I've got that claims data, that policy data, that financial information, and I can surface it to a client manager or a contact center person, and I can deal with the fact that the system isn't working. If I can answer the questions, we're lucky we haven't got massive volumes of millions and millions of policies as an example, because we're more commercial. But those sort of things are where I'm trying to get the team to think a bit more outside the box. So, we're having to do a bare metal install of a 45-year-old platform. Well, guess what? It's going to take weeks. Sorry, that's how it is. It's not something quick. So what do we need to do around that? So really trying to get that innovative thinking in. So we're pushing the resilience as not being a technology, but being just, it's people, it's thought, it's innovation, which I know is probably 5-10 years ago might not have been quite so in tune, but I think resilience is a great place for innovation. So pushing that stuff out. I think if you want a war story or something that's gone wrong, previous role, my last role, we built a whole microservices-based policy admin platform. Very, very complicated, used Dynatrace and lovely tools for observability. It was very, very complicated. I think Matt's in the room who knew a lot more about it. So we were great until we went to try and put it live, and I'd not spent anywhere near enough time ensuring that we truly understood our resilient platform, and that Kafka could save me lots of problems. It didn't save all my problems. So I think it's, you rush to get things done. It's about 5 years ago. You can really kind of miss the wood for the trees. I think that's definitely something that I've learned a lot of, and we're not doing it this way now.
I think operational resilience and the regulation specifically makes us or forces us to think about those scenarios, and I guess it's in a good way. And obviously, being a regulated bank, so you need to think through, do the tabletop testing, challenge it. So that's the part of, I guess, the process now, because obviously this is last 3 years, I guess we're having those operational resilience discussions and getting more mature in our understanding what are the failure points that we have within our infrastructure. So I think I can give a good example. Like probably you would not think about previously, I didn't, that your VPN can be your failure point, but it is. And if the incident is happening, now people are thinking, okay, this is happening and this would be the impact of it, which itself shows like it's making the difference, what it should have made previously. And I think it's not more like a tick in the box exercise. It is showing the impact because people are thinking from that perspective, what can fail in your infrastructure and how you're going to recover from it. I guess at the end of the day, if everything fails, the technology fails, then you have your manual processes in place. And that's what we are all working towards.
Yeah, I think from a sort of resiliency perspective, I'll give you an example. When I used to work at DWP, we used to verify that people had the right to vote online. So working with the Cabinet Office. So anytime there was any kind of election, we had like all systems go 24/7, and which sounds great until you realise that people in the middle of the night think, oh, I might just go online and try and see if I can register to vote online. And then, so we literally, you've got the sort of service downtime, the sort of, it's weekend, so literally 24/7, so a general election, local election, or any kind of European at the time, before we didn't do that, but so in that space. So, and it was like, we didn't really think about that. And then when it started happening, it's like, oh, crikey. So somebody actually ended up taking a laptop to bed because things started going wrong. So if the servers were down in the offices, which was like at the time in a cupboard, and it was like if anything happened, it was like we were actually providing this service as a 24/7 service around this thing, and the SLA with the Cabinet Office was really strict. It was like there was like 0 downtime allowed during that time. So that was a real lesson in resilience, and be careful what you sign up to, because we absolutely had the capability to deliver the thing. We absolutely had the data to check whether people had met the requirement, but actually the process of delivery in terms of operational resilience, 24/7 operational service to manage that, no. So yeah, that was interesting. Yeah, so we had to put all of that stuff in after the event.
Great, thanks, Corinne. I think we've got another question.
Do you think there's a level of complacency when it comes to legacy tech? So thinking specifically about the recent banking failures and HP non-stop and Tandem and IBM resources just disappearing on the market?
Yes, probably. I don't know. I think there is a level of complacency, in my opinion, because the systems are so inherently resilient compared to maybe the last couple of iterations. I think things are changing now, and more modern technology is back up over that curve. But I think there's probably some technology from the last sort of 20, 30 years, which isn't very resilient at all. So there's the perception that these systems, these old mainframe systems, will just go on and they will work. And they won't, and the number of people you've got to look after them is dwindling. And we were talking earlier that there's people going out to university getting graduates in to program in these old languages because you just literally can't get anyone to do it, and the only people to do it are people who are desperate for a job. So, which is ironic, really, in many ways. But I think so. But I think also it's probably a little bit symptomatic as well. It might be a bit of concentration, where I don't think people are taking their eye off the ball that much, and people do spend a lot of time looking after these platforms as well. So it's probably a bit of both.
I heard your opinions on AI, but ignoring that for a minute, a lot of people are starting to rely on machine learning and to make decisions, and those types of analytics and leaning into analytics. And some of the things you mentioned, dunnhumby, we worked with them a long time ago, they often come in when look at the analytics when everyone else is saying it's leaning left, and at the very last minute they go, you're looking at it wrong, and they twist it. And some of our best victories and successes have come from them going, I know it looks like it's left, but it's actually right, and here's why. How do you stop that when everyone's starting to rely on these data points and machine learning, and it just doesn't quite make sense, but the data's showing you that? Like, how do we do that when we're stopping that human factor in there?
I'd probably point you to a couple of books. There's a great book by a guy called Dan Davis called The Unaccountability Machine, which is about how, one of the many things it's about how the world is getting so complex that we have to sort of push decisions to either policies, large organizations, which Dan calls effectively old, slow-moving artificial intelligences, or artificial intelligences themselves. But that the world is getting so complex that effectively there's no way out of it. The other thing we were talking about before, I think, though, was that there is a sort of a culture of trying to use artificial intelligence to replace people, but the sort of phrasing of using it as a co-pilot, and I personally really like the way that Microsoft is selling that, sort of tries to nudge you against that and to say, no, it's a decision-making tool, it's your robot friend, but it isn't there to replace you as an employee, it's there to help you, but you shouldn't necessarily lose your own decision-making skills, although there are some of, I guess there was some interesting Microsoft research that says people are losing critical skills by overuse of AI. And the other thing, I think Tim Harford, I forget which of Tim Harford's many awesome books it is in, but about the paradox of automation. He uses as the example of one of the Air France flights that went down over the Atlantic, flying back from Brazil, that too much automation, again, reduces people's skills, and when they have to take over, they've just lost the ability to, because something like an autopilot, they're just used to it being able to work in all circumstances as opposed to all except the worst.
So I think there's a thing around sort of the ethical use of, AI, machine learning. I think it's about that sort of risk space. So if something's too risky to use it on, and you do need a person, so there's a really, obviously in the public domain, Department for Education off-call thing around COVID exams, which we'll all have heard of, around using that algorithm to sort of work out the modification of the grades, which obviously hit the fan big time. So it's kind of in that scenario, it's like that was not a good ethical use of any kind of algorithm. So it's kind of like sometimes it's not risky. It's like it's just a sort of proxy measure or something. I think that's fine. But if it's something very specific where it's either a personal outcome that makes a difference to somebody, or it's in the case of something where somebody gets some money from it, either more or less money, I think they're the things where you've got to be a bit more savvy and a bit there's got to be some human intervention, assurance, something like that around it. There are things where it doesn't really matter if you're a few percentage points out or whatever, and that's fine, because in the grand scheme of things it doesn't actually matter. So I think there's that ethical bit around that risk, and back to that risk and reward bit again. What's too risky to do it with, and what isn't? What's a safe bet where it's like you can get rid of boring, mundane stuff by doing that with it, and it doesn't really matter.
I think it'll be more controversial and say I think it's going to go too far. I think it will absolutely will. And as you're saying, Simon, we're doing loads of automation in the insurance industry. I think McKinsey are saying 62% of jobs can be removed with AI, and I think they're probably right. And we'll do that, and then we'll go too far, and then people won't make proper decisions, and there'll be a new industry, which is and a whole new consulting angle about taking out bad decisions that AI have made, and how you're going to get into it, and how you're going to help people move forward and stop being so reliant on it. I just think we'll evolve like we do everything else. I think we'll go far too far in some areas, then we'll have to pull back. I know it's a pretty corporate way to say, oh, of course it'll be fine. I just don't think it will be.
Any more questions from around the room? Oh, there's one over here, Nick. Thanks.
Hi there. Just wondering if you're doing anything in particular around resilience and security on some of the SaaS platforms which you think are bulletproof and will never go down, but we all know they do.
Happy to answer.
Can you please repeat the question, please? Yeah.
Maybe I get an award if you can't answer. No, are you doing anything particularly special around resilience and security on some of the SaaS platforms? Salesforce, for example, right? Pretty prevalent. Everyone thinks it's SaaS, it's fine, it takes care of itself, but we've plugged it in so many other things, right? That it is actually kind of core to a lot of organizations. And I'm just, interested in if you're any insights of how your observability, planning for resilience events and all that sort of thing.
I think from security perspective, I guess there are a lot of tools available. So I think it's just like from cloud perspective. So you can integrate the tooling within your cloud resources and get more insights before the problems actually happen. But I think it's quite vast area. We are trying to deploy the tools, bring in more tools there, and see if we can strengthen. But I think it's just, again, I always feel that security is kind of a race all the time. And it's a kind of thing where you are never done, but obviously continuously looking at what tools are available out in the market that can be used to strengthen the security of the systems.
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. It's a conversation me and my team have quite often around what are we going to do? We're using Dynamics, and as a heart, I've got a lot of our new systems, the same as Salesforce really, and it's like, do we keep all the data stored within that? Do we take all the data out of that and ensure that we can survive without it? And then at that point, why are you using it if you're taking out so much? So, I mean, from a security standpoint, obviously speaking to Microsoft a lot and trying to balance it out, I think it's risk and reward. If there's some things you really don't want to lose, you're not going to put them in that sort of platform, or you're going to have other methodologies or other triggers to get things out. I think it's just trying to be relevant to what you're doing and where you need to put workload, where you want to put your effort.
No, I'd agree. There is no easy answer to this. You are, again, those of us who are regulated are forced to think about it. I was having a phone call with our deputy CISO about our concentration risk for Microsoft, and ultimately it is a risk that we take as an organization. And it is back to that risk. It's back to that risk-reward trade-off. Do you really want to build your own IDP, CRM system? One or two organizations are looking at it. People like Klarna are effectively saying, no, we're going to use low-code and build our own CRM system, and we believe that's a risk-reward trade-off we want to take. Maybe more people will follow them, but I think right now, Dynamics and Salesforce really have cornered the market and really have proved their resilience over time. And I think ultimately that's the sort of risk mitigation, or at least risk confidence, that people are taking to say that we don't want to build our own CRM, and we think that risk is one we want to take.
There's risk as well to do that, isn't it? You might gain on this hand, you're going to lose on that hand, aren't you?
Oh, sure, yeah.
So I'm going to up the ante a little bit, right? At this time of day, I normally look on my phone at what a certain blonde-haired individual has done an executive order about that day. You talked about risks a moment ago, and it's very insightful. Do you think we've got geopolitical risk in the hyperscalers that we're using, and therefore are you beginning to think about private clouds or sovereign data here in the UK and Europe?
Yes, we're beginning to think about it. Honestly, yes. Again, with the same conversation with the same lady, or is it a different conversation with the same lady, just a couple of weeks ago on exactly that. Geopolitical risk is real. Again, the author Dan Davis wrote a piece in the Financial Times about 2 weeks ago on exactly this, on the sort of weaponization of the monopolies of the hyperscalers. It is right. Again, there is no easy answer to it. Private cloud might be one. I don't think in the time we will need to do it that there will be a European equivalent. So it's certainly something we have to think about, but definitely no easy answer to it.
Yeah, I think from a sort of a government department perspective, that's a really risky business. We've got, sensitive kids data. We've got, all the pupils in school in England. It's like putting it in a private cloud that you just open up different security issues. So yeah, again, it's that balancing, and do you jump or do you just go, actually, this is a bigger problem than us, and actually, if something happens, it's going to be a bigger issue than something that we're going to solve. And if we do something different and that becomes more of a risk, then there's a whole other issue, isn't there? So yeah, I think it's just that balance again of do you, don't you, or just stick with it and see what happens type thing.
I think it's a trade-off. Like probably there has been a lot of debates about public versus private, and obviously there was a shift from private cloud to public, and now we are seeing a shift starting to private cloud. I guess probably most recently, people moving to the private cloud, but I think it's just like probably not in that category as of now. I think it's a different risks. Obviously, security risks is a major one because obviously you're relying on a smaller team. I think a public cloud are probably obviously there is a concentration risk where you're relying on the cloud providers massively, but there's another risk that they have tested. I mean, they have bigger teams with more skill set to build the security and resiliency than us, and then do we want to do it? It's just like balancing or making a choice here. Do we want to focus on what we actually do rather than start building a cloud of our own? So I think that's the kind of trade-off here.
It's a really difficult one, isn't it? I mean, the FCA were pushing really hard for that cloud concentration, and if you look at just the UK insurance market, 90% of people are on an AWS or Azure. That's an interesting dynamic, isn't it? You said both managed elsewhere. But we were looking before about polyglot architecture and being able to move your workload from private cloud to public cloud and just lift and shift. Then you don't use any of the hyperscaler functionality that comes with it, and then you have to replace it, and then you're paying for it twice, 3 times. Then it's blinking expensive, and you haven't really gained any benefit. So, what are you solving towards? So there's an answer, a technology answer. But is it a business answer? And I think that's when it starts to get, it's difficult, isn't it? There is no one solution.
Yeah. Okay, I think we've got time for one more question. So, one. Yep.
Thank you. Hi, yeah. I want to take us back to something you said earlier about kind of the business architecture, or the fact that you talked about 25 years and how things have changed, and I remember what it was like, and it was no fun, and frankly didn't work. So I see, within the tech space, we're working differently. But I'm really interested to hear what you guys think about to what degree we need to reorg the whole organization, or is this something we can do within the silo of kind of a technology bubble?
Watch the space for the book that was the follow-up in about 2 years. But I think there are things you can do. I'm fairly lucky at Saxo Bank. We did do a reorg where we've sort of merged business and technology. There are still people using the language of them and us, the business, but our technology teams sit alongside or managed under the business departments that they work for, and it has made a difference to how we can deliver value more efficiently and collaboratively, but also in how we're able to balance non-functional, they're not really non-functional, but sort of classical non-functional requirements of resilience, scalability, performance, etc., with new features. So our payments department are just focusing on resilience for the next probably year, honestly, and I think the reorg has helped that a lot. So no, there are definitely things we can do to do that, to get it to burst the silos.
So from a government department perspective, obviously we've got a lot of policy folks, so within education it's predominantly a policy department, because obviously the front line is schools and higher education and colleges, etc., and children's social care. So our sort of model used to be that they gave us stuff to do and we delivered it, and they went, oh yeah, whatever, get on something else, and all that sort of stuff. But now we try and deliver with them. So we have that multidisciplinary team, policy are part of that team. We've got all the right people in the tent doing stuff. So you'll probably see all over the news about school attendance. That's something that my team are doing. We are joined at the hip with the policy team. We're joined at the hip with the sector to make that a thing, to actually try and work through all the issues. But if we just delivered a a data product for them, it wouldn't have had the same impact. So that's changed the dial really for what we're doing and how we deliver. So we're just going to start and do that with the children's social care data as well, and with that policy team and with the sector, try and find out what have they got, what products can we make it into for them so that can add value to them, rather than just deliver them something over the fence and go, here you are, we thought you might find this useful, that sort of thing. So yes, that's made a big difference, but there are other areas where we don't do that and it doesn't land as well. So it's just getting that buy-in, and it's trying to turn the dial in their side, that they're not just a customer, they're part of that process. So
I don't see how product or business or technology can work separately, because unless they come together, I don't think we can solve the real problems. And I think that is the kind of cultural shift I've seen at Elica specifically. When I joined, probably business and technology were quite far away, and then we built a model where we brought them together. And I think that has made a difference, because even on data, even on software applications, you can't make the change until the people who are actually working to deliver the change, if they don't understand the problem well. And that applies to the data as well. And I think we have gone through a journey where we had a centralized data team, centralized technology teams, and we could not make the change that we really wanted to see. But as soon as we actually merged them together, brought them together, we started seeing our engineers, our data engineers, they started contributing to the actual problems. And I think that's a huge example where we see bringing them together is more beneficial. And nowadays, probably I don't see how everything is technology. Basically every day, there were days probably when we were talking about the paper, having those conversation, but everyone within the organization are using technology tools. It's just they need to understand it. That's the reality of the world now.
Yeah, super passionate about it. I think technology should be a value enabler, value creation. It's a business unit in its own right. It should not be a cost center. And if you're on your edge, then you're wasting the effort of the team. I suppose I spend most of my day evangelizing about that at the moment. So we've got quite a long way to go on that journey. But in other jobs, we've definitely been successful when we were together. Shared goals, shared objectives. We're just a part of the puzzle, and the sooner you get working like that, the quicker you get the decisions. As we talked about earlier about which cost versus value. Well, if you're together, there isn't cost versus value. It's just what do we want to do? We just build whatever's required for the business. So the closer we are, the closer the teams are, the better it is, as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you, Graham. I'd just like to say a big thank you to our panellists, so Simon, Corinne, Ravneet, and Graham.